Hey everyone, welcome back to History on the Spot. So today is going to be my I say historical, but it's going to be my review for Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Now, I'm going to be dividing this up into 3 separate talking points. Those 3 talking points are going to be mythology, history, and the story. Now, this has nothing to do with the acting skills. This has nothing to do with the director or anything else. This has everything to do with the story that is told, the actresses and actors that are cast, the faithfulness to Homers Odyssey, and how well Greek mythology and history is represented on screen. And warning, spoilers are ahead, so watch this at your own risk if you have yet to see the movie. Now, we start with our first section, which is mythology. This was by far one of my biggest disappointments, and it is the longest section because there were so many things that made me so mad. I went to go see the movie with my dad. He had to physically restrain me to make sure I wasn't gonna do anything stupid because of how much inaccuracy I saw. I've read The Odyssey several times. I reread it right before I went to go see the movie. Everything was fresh in my mind, so I went into it expecting to see so many different things, and it was just a letdown. My first point on that, the gods, where are they? There's supposed to be a whole plot and scheme to get Odysseus home from the island of Ogygia. Could be pronounced Ogygia, I'm not entirely sure. Feel free to correct me on that one. But the only god we really see is Athena, and that's not even really her. That's more like a guilty conscience, fever, PTS dream. I'm not entirely sure, but it's not really her. It's just a guilty conscience thing. I mean, we're supposed to see so much of the gods, everything from Athena orchestrating the plan to get Odysseus home, Poseidon trying to constantly kill him, and even the god of the winds, Aeolus, who literally gave them temporary aid from his floating island that Odysseus and his crew are supposed to come across in the middle of the ocean. The next big thing is the monsters. Wow, I had so many problems with the monsters. I had to physically look away most of the time because I was so upset with how the monsters were done. My biggest gripe is the Cyclops Polyphemus. Now, in the movie, he's got like the mental acuity of a child. He just grumbles and groans. He doesn't really talk. You hear kind of what sounds like him saying Poseidon after he's blinded, but that's about it. It tones down the original story. It strips away the entire original story, actually, because in the original story, there's so much back and forth banter between Odysseus and Polyphemus. I mean, Polyphemus is literally eating some of the crew, like every night. Odysseus is having entire conversations with him. When Odysseus making his plan to trick the Cyclops into opening the door, he formulates the plan to use a hot stake to stab out his eye. After he does that, Polyphemus is supposed to, he's supposed to scream in pain. He does that in the movie, but he's also supposed to ask, who are you? Why did you do this to me? What is your name? And Odysseus is supposed to tell him that his name is nobody. So that when the other Cyclopes who lived on the island or on the land that they were at ask Polyphemus, who blinded you, all he can say is, nobody blinded me. I mean, Batman in the Justice League Unlimited animated series got that right. And when Odysseus and his men are escaping the island, he's supposed to yell back to Polyphemus, essentially, and this is not word for word, but he's supposed to essentially yell, hey, my name is Odysseus, I'm the one who blinded you. That is when Polyphemus prays to Poseidon to curse and kill Odysseus. We don't see that in the movie. The closest we get is Odysseus shooting at Polyphemus with a bow and arrow. And on the note of Odysseus and his crew, Odysseus sailed home with like a dozen ships, and instead we see 3. He sailed home with a dozen ships and hundreds of men, and yet we see only 3 ships, 2 of which are extremely small, and also, actually, I'll get into that in a bit. The next one, my next point is for all the other monsters like Scylla, the Sirens, and the Lystragonian giants. They don't even match up to the original myths. Scylla is supposed to be like this dragon-headed creature that is so fast you're not even supposed to be able to register that her head came down and took one of your crew. And instead it looked more like the tentacles of an octopus. I'm sorry, that's what it looked like to me. That was the most... That I get that Christopher Nolan didn't want to use, CGI, but come on, you can make an exception here, especially for a monster that's supposed to be so fast your eyes cannot register that someone has been taken, other than the fact that that person is no longer there. For the Sirens, I would have loved that sequence if we had gotten to listen to the song. I mean, Odysseus describes it afterwards, but it would have been cool to, hear something. And instead, I don't even remember I think it was just music. And that just, it completely killed any momentum that scene might have had. Also, nobody jumps overboard. The one guy that took his beeswax out of his ears or whatever, or honey bee wax or whatever it was, took the wax out of his ears, that didn't happen. That was probably one of the stupidest plot points of that entire sequence. I was like this the entire time. Next set of monsters is the Lystragonian giants. They are supposed to be like 20, 30 feet tall in the books. Like, you're supposed to look up. And I mean, like, crane your neck and you almost can't see the top of the ceiling of their buildings. Odysseus sends scouts ahead. They're supposed to meet what is essentially a young Lystragonian giant girl. Like, she's young by giant standards. She's also small by giant standards. And she's supposed to point them to this massive city or settlement or something like that. We don't see that. Instead, we're in the middle of the woods. And on top of that, the giants are supposed to be cannibals. They are supposed to kill Odysseus' crew and eat them later on. And the ships, like in the movie, it's the 3 ships, they're beached, and it made it easier for everybody to get on and off the ships. But in the original story, they're supposed to be in like this big circular harbor thing. Like, I'm not exactly sure how to describe it, but Odysseus sends most of his ships in there. He leaves his ship outside of this harbor because, he wants to be able to make a fast getaway. And when Odysseus' scouts are returning, the giants start picking up these massive boulders and lobbing them straight down at Odysseus' ships, sinking all of them, killing all of the crew. Those who survive are killed later. Spears and javelins are literally thrown through the men and impaling them. Odysseus' ship is the only one that manages to escape. Now, this next point is technically they're not really monsters, and I still don't fully understand the myth and legend behind it. So if anyone wants to give me more context on it, you can. The Lotus Eaters. They're not even mentioned in the movie, but they play a very significant part in the original story. Nolan attempts to get past this by having Odysseus eat some random flower that grows on the island of Ogygia that is supposed to make him forget everything, but that didn't happen on Ogygia. That happened in a completely different spot. Odysseus and his whole crew ate the flowers, and they were in that territory, on that island, whatever it was, for an unknown amount of time. Remember, Odysseus is supposed to have been left Troy and disappeared for 10 years. He spent an unspecified amount of time with the Lotus Eaters. Now, the next part for mythology is the incident on Circe's Island, where the crew is changed into pigs. Now, they weren't Play-Doh'd into pigs. That didn't happen. It was a potion or like a poison or something. Because Circe's a witch. She is a witch. And Odysseus didn't just stumble up to the house. One of the crew actually managed to hide and watch Circe poison the crew and turn them into pigs. He escaped back to the ships, went and got Odysseus. Odysseus then came back up to the house using his intellect, which he is very well known for, and his tricks as well. He tricked Circe to not only turning the crew back, but also sparing him and promising never to harm the crew again. In exchange for this, they agree. She basically makes him promise to enter into a romantic relationship with him. They stay on her island for an entire year. And after that year is up, they then set sail to Hades, which, by the way, we hear that they're supposed to sail up a river of fire. It's called the Phlegethon. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's called the Phlegethon, the river of fire. Where is it? I saw what looked like maybe some lava in the distance, I think, or maybe that was supposed to be the sunset. I'm not entirely sure, but I didn't see the Phlegethon. So, now as for the interactions in Hades, wow, I hated that scene. The only accurate part of that, or parts, I should say, are the interactions with Agamemnon, the blind prophet Tiresias, and Odysseus and his crew running from the dead. That's about it. We don't see him interact with Achilles or Ajax, which in the story he does. We don't see him interact with his mother, which he's supposed to, or one of his crew members, who's named Elpenor, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but his name is Elpenor, who died literally right before they left Circe's island, and he asked them, hey, go back to the island and please give me a proper burial so that I can pass on through Hades, so I can go on and rest peacefully. That's not supposed to happen. And then after that, they leave Hades, and they're supposed to return to Circe's island one more time to get some more information. I didn't see them go back to Circe's island. Now, as for Odysseus' time on the island of Ogygia, whatever you want to call it, we don't really get an explanation for it. Nolan just kind of throws it in there with no real context and so many questions that don't get answered. There's no mention of how Calypso, who is this eternal, some legends say nymph, some say minor goddess. I'm not really sure. You can take your pick. All I know is that in Greek mythology, she is the daughter of the Titan Atlas, the same Atlas who you see in history and geography textbooks holding the world on his shoulders. No mention of her being the daughter of Atlas. And also, the cave in the story that she lives in is basically gone. To me, it looked like she was living in some sort of like wooden hut. Maybe it was a cave, and she just had wood decorating it, I'm not sure. But it looked more like a wood hut most of the time. So, I had to come back and actually make this part because it was something that I almost forgot about because it blew my mind. But it was something that I actually heard about before I actually saw the movie. The island that Odysseus and his men stop at before their ships are destroyed, right? Or before their last ship is destroyed. It's supposed to have these sacred cattle, that they're not supposed to eat. They are warned, do not eat this cattle or your men will die. And the problem with that one is they call it the sun god's cattle. The sun god referring to Apollo, the god of the sun and archery. Those cattle have absolutely nothing to do with Apollo. Those are the sun titans cattle, Helios, who drove around the sun before Apollo. Why are they called the sun god? Why are they referred to as Apollo's sacred cattle? Those are Helios's sacred cattle. I wanted to include that because it was another big gripe I had, especially after I watched it. I was dumbfounded. I was absolutely dumbfounded. Now we move on to the history. Now, throughout the movie, we keep hearing a reference to a group of people called the Sea People. Now, in the movie, it is revealed that Odysseus and his crew are the Sea People, and that the reason Greek civilization is slowly starting to collapse is because they stopped following what is called the Law of Zeus. Now, here is essentially what the Law of Zeus is. Now, the Law of Zeus, or Zeus's Law as it's sometimes called, is the ancient Greek moral code of hospitality. essentially, it requires the host to offer food, shelter, and kindness to travelers before asking their names, and because there's this fear that the traveler or the guest might be a god in disguise, because the gods did test mortals in Greek mythology like that. So that was essentially what, Zeus's law is. And that's not even remotely, the way Nolan portrays it is not even remotely close to the real life history. The Sea People were an actual militaristic threat to the Mediterranean. They began attacking settlements all over the Mediterranean, including Greek settlements, right around 1200 BC. But they were made up of several groups of raiders that just started going and attacking all these different settlements across the Mediterranean. There was no group of sailors that was breaking Zeus's law. It wasn't people breaking the law of Zeus. That's not what it was. It was an actual threat of attack from a legitimate group of people that did help bring about the collapse of a lot of different settlements across the Mediterranean. Now, my next big gripe with the historical accuracy point is the costumes. Oh my God, the costumes. Everyone looks like they're supposed to be Vikings. Like, where are the tunics and robes? Where's all the color? Ancient Greece was awash with color in every depiction that we have of it. Wearing tunics and robes. They've got clothing, like loose-fitting clothing, fitted that's what they're wearing. They're using Viking longships instead of Greek triremes. Like, I get Nolan was trying to be practical, and there aren't very many real-life Greek triremes, but they are out there. They're not that difficult to find. You just have to put in the effort to get them. I'm sure that people would have offered them, especially if you're making a movie about ancient Greece. And the costume, the weapons and armor, looked like it was from a Halloween store most of the time, especially the Trojans. Everything looked like rubber and plastic. I have seen so many, like in museums and in historical videos, I've seen so many sets of ancient Greek armor. Why couldn't Nolan do something like that? Like, where's the diversity? The Trojan War was fought between multiple kings of Greece, led by Agamemnon, who was basically the king warlord of all Greece, against the Trojans. These different Greek kings would have had different types of armor and weapons for their men. Where is that diversity? Everyone besides basically Agamemnon in the movie is wearing the same thing, and it's basically just rubber versions of Spartan helmets and what looks like leather chest plates. Where's the diversity? Like, where's the diversity in weapons and gear and armor? This is literally the Bronze Age. Metal weapons and armor are a thing in the Bronze Age. Colorful clothing was all the rage, especially in high society areas, like, royal houses, kings, queens, princes, princesses, even generals. They would have had bright colored clothing to represent their status. Yeah, the common people maybe would have worn some rough skin tunics or maybe furs, but everybody still had some color to them. Now, I know this next one, everyone's going to tell me that it's a fictional story, so history shouldn't play a part in it, except it does. This is a story set in a real time period that talks about a real war and a real militaristic threat in the Sea People. And yet so much has changed in the movie. This is what I like to call Hollywoodization. Nolan took a well-known story set in a heavily studied era of history and said, nah, I'm just going to change the history and hope no one notices or cares. But for those of us that respect and love history, especially in an era like the Bronze Age, we do care and we do notice. I care a lot because of how much I've studied Greek mythology and ancient Greek history. I care a lot. And on another note, and I know I'm going to get hate for this, why did we need a diverse cast for this movie? I love that Nolan wanted a lot of representation. That's great. For any other movie, that works. But that is not the movie to do this for. This is a movie set in Bronze Age Greece. Use Greek actors. I am sure that Nolan could have very easily found several to work with, if not maybe hundreds or thousands to work with. And going back in a little bit into the mythology side of things, Helen of Troy. Helen of Troy is described by several sources as fair-skinned with blonde, sometimes almost golden hair. And also, at no point in Homer's Odyssey or in any other document I've ever read about Helen does Menelaus ever get beat the hell out of, like in getting disfigured. Menelaus doesn't do that. In fact, from the tone that I perceived in the original in Homer's Odyssey, they seem to have made up, like kissed and made up. Like, there was no anger or resentment at least none that I saw when I read it. Why Nolan decided to go the route of the casting choice for that, I have no idea. I want to pronounce her name, but I also don't want to butcher it, because she is a good actor. I won't lie. She's a great actor. But I don't think she was the right choice. And also, if anybody could provide me the right pronunciation for her name, I would like to stop butchering it. I would also like to point out the character of Sinon, played by Elliot Page. Sinon is not in the Odyssey, and nowhere is Sinon in the Odyssey, ever. Sinon is not mentioned until a much later written story. And getting Elliot Page to play a supposedly great Greek warrior, which Sinon is described as a great warrior in Greece, Elliot Page does not look even close to like anything related to a Greek warrior. Elliot Page is so small and looked extremely uncomfortable in armor that clearly did not fit. I would also like to point out that in the stories that Sinon is mentioned in, Sinon did not die, but rather he actually lived and even spoke to the Trojan king Priam and convinced him to bring the Trojan horse into the city. But he didn't die. In fact, I even looked this up before I made this. There's no record of what happened to him after Troy is destroyed. Now, I get it. It's a fictional story. But it doesn't matter. It's set in a real historical time period. Is it that hard to be accurate to said time period? Other historical fiction movies have done it. I will name them. I could name several of them, actually. Last of the Mohicans, Gladiator, Master and Commander, Far Side of the World. Like, that's just a few of the ones that I've seen, and they are far more historically faithful to the time periods that they're set in. Gladiator is set in ancient Rome, and it's somehow more historically accurate. Yes, there were actors of different races because the Roman Empire stretched all the way into North Africa. They brought in slaves and gladiators from all over. I mean, they conquered the old Alexandrian Empire that was made by Alexander the Great. They conquered Egypt. They conquered much of the known world at the time. And yet somehow, Gladiator is more historically accurate, time period-wise, than Nolan's Odyssey. Make it make sense. Now we move on to the story. Now, thematically, this version of the Odyssey makes absolutely no sense to me at any point. Odysseus is played off as like this guilt-ridden guy who has like PTSD visions of a priestess that is supposed to be also Athena, that was killed in front of him, and he's so driven by this guilt that he has that he convinces himself that he broke the law of Zeus by making the Trojan horse. That's not even close to the original character of Odysseus. In the original story, he's a trickster. He has this great intellect, and he uses his wits to help him escape all of these desperate situations that he's gotten into before. He's also arrogant. I mentioned it earlier when we were talking about the mythology and Polyphemus. He called out to Polyphemus after they had already left the island, as they're leaving the island, and said, "Hey, my name's Odysseus. I'm the one who blinded you." That was pure arrogance on his part. And I mean, he's the guy who came up with the Trojan horse And in the case of the siege of Troy, the law of Zeus has nothing to stand on here. It's a war. It is a war. The law is for guests and travelers, not a besieging army. In a war, especially ancient wars like the Trojan War, you have to think of some pretty out-of-the-box plans to win. And in the case of the Trojan War, that plan was Odysseus's Trojan horse. Like, come on. And for my next point, I understand Nolan was working against time constraint with the movie. I get that. I've seen maybe 2 movies, possibly 3. I could be wrong on that. But I've seen a very select few amount of movies that have had super long run times. Biggest one I can think of is the Ben-Hur movies. I haven't seen them in a while, but I know that there is an intermission. Could have easily done that. Because from the time that Odysseus departs Troy to when he gets back to Ithaca, he is supposed to have been gone for 10 years. And yet his voyage from Troy to washing up on the shores of Ogygia seemed to have only taken up anywhere from like a few weeks to maybe 2 months. I mean, I said it earlier, he spent an unknown amount of time on the island of the Lotus Eaters. And they're not even mentioned in the movie, but he's also supposed to stay a full year with Circe, and then after everything else happens, he then lands on Ogygia. Nolan could have easily solved that entire timing problem with one simple trick, a montage. That could let the audience know that, hey, a lot of time is passing within this montage. The only way the montage does not work is for the island of the Lotus Eaters, and that's because we don't know how much time passed when they were on that island. Now, Nolan also cuts out what is, in my opinion, one of the most important groups of people within the story of the Odyssey, and that's the Phoenicians, or the Phaeacians. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I could be wrong, but I'm going to say Phaeacians. I think that's right, Phaeacians. He lands on the shores of their island, and they follow Zeus's law. They give him clothes, food. They let him rest. It is to the Phaeacian king, Alcinous, and all the others that attend this banquet that is held for Odysseus, that Odysseus recounts his adventures to everyone, not to Calypso, and definitely not while recovering from eating an amnesiac flower. Like, come on. It's not that hard to add that in. If anything, that might have actually given you more opportunities to cast bigger names. Like, come on. And I'm going to move on to the final confrontation against the suitors, which happens after Odysseus strings his bow, which, by the way, I did love that. I love how Nolan did that. But in the original story, he goes off. He is taking down the suitors left and right. But he's not doing it by himself. He is being helped by his son Telemachus. He's being helped by his cowherd Philoetius and his swineherd Eumaeus. He's got divine backup from Athena, for crying out loud. At no point in the story does he ever tell Telemachus, no, you can't help me. You'll be breaking the law of Zeus. That doesn't happen. The law of Zeus has already been broken by the suitors. And by the law of Zeus, if you break said laws of Zeus, you are liable to be struck down by either Zeus himself or the master of the house. And in this case, master of the house is Odysseus. He had every right to kill those suitors. In the original story, he clears them out. He kills every single one of them, including the female servants that those suitors took on as lovers. He spares no one that betrayed him or that stole from him. But in the movie, several are spared, including the female servant, if I remember correctly, the female servant that was the lover of Antinous. And he also doesn't get exiled from Ithaca. He stays as the king. There's no penalty for breaking the law of Zeus because he wasn't the one who broke it. The ones who broke it are the suitors. They're the ones who broke the law. They got punished for it by death. That's the penalty, basically. Like, and I could be wrong on that. Maybe I'm misunderstood how the law of Zeus works, but I'm pretty sure that the law of Zeus says if you break the law of Zeus, you're gonna die. And whether it be by Zeus's hand or by the master of the house, you are going to die. Oh, wow. So much wrong just with these main points. And I could point out a million other things that I saw that were wrong. I'll get into it in the outro. One more point that I forgot to mention. At the end of the movie, Odysseus, like, throws himself in exile, like, into a self-exile because he broke the law of Zeus. Oh, Nolan either just didn't read the Odyssey or he just did not care. Odysseus doesn't exile himself. He stays as the king of Ithaca. He literally exiled himself because he was paying the penalty for breaking the law of Zeus. And in the movie, he's also doing it to honor the dead. No, that's not what happened. He stayed as the king of Ithaca. He didn't have to pay a penalty because there was no penalty to pay. He didn't break the law of Zeus. That was the suitors. I don't know why Nolan went this direction, but he did. And it killed any last shred of hope I had for the movie, because just why? Why would you just crap all over what you had left to film? Like, just why? Now, I said that there were so many other things wrong with this movie. From a historical standpoint, the walls of Troy. Like, what was that? Just what was that? I mean, come on. Those walls are supposed to be intimidating. The walls of Troy were said to be massive, nigh unscalable. Like, the Greeks tried for 10 years, 10 freaking years, to break those walls, to break the Trojan army. And they failed at every turn. The most progress that they made was landing on the beach where they made their initial assaults from and had their camp at, and that was about it. Like, the Trojans were kicking their butts. And yeah, I'm supposed to believe that those small, tiny walls that I could have probably climbed without a ladder are supposed to be the intimidating walls of Troy? No. And on a more, back to the story, every depiction of the Trojan horse that I've seen, it's on wheels. Even if said wheels are built onto a cart that the horse is placed on, it's on wheels. They don't drag it from across the sand several miles back to the city. If anything, that would have destroyed the horse and completely botched the plan. It's shown to be on wheels. If it had been dragged as far as it was supposed to, because the ancient site of Troy is not really that close to the water. I've looked it up on Google Maps. It is labeled, there's like an actual place labeled Ruins of Troy. You can look this up yourself. It is nowhere close to the water. From that kind of a distance, if the Trojans really found it on the beach, that distance would have shredded that horse to kindling eventually. It would have fallen apart. Now, overall, this movie clearly was not good to me. Yeah, it had some cool action sequences and some cool visuals, but being a history nerd and having studied Greek mythology so much and so heavily, I can't bring myself to love this movie. I never will. I just can't. So much was changed either because Nolan was trying to check all of his boxes to get an Oscar, or because he just simply didn't care. I mean, you can tell me in the comments that I'm wrong, or that I'm a bigot, or that I'm a racist, and you're entitled to your opinions just as I'm entitled to mine. And some of you might even, some of you did it in my Young Washington review. You brought up 300, and you challenged me on the 300 thing. Guess what? As I mentioned in Young Washington, 300 is based on the graphic novel. If 300 was really based on the history, the Spartans would have had armor, and there would have been thousands of other Greek warriors to fight the Persians. But it's based on the graphic novel. Now, it also works because it was storytelling. It was propagandized storytelling. That was how a lot of news spread, was word of mouth and exaggerated details. I mean, you hear in the movie how the Persian army is described as these monsters and the immortals, and there's all these grotesque figures, and there's rhinos and elephants, and all this stuff. But that was pure propaganda. I mean, that was how the ancient world operated. You told the story to upplay the good guys, make them look like the warrior elites that are fighting for Greece, and then you demonize the bad guys and make them look like these hideous creatures that have basically no mind of their own. Now, everyone will have their likes and dislikes for this movie. But for me, when the dislikes outweigh the likes this much, I have to say that I'm just disappointed and that the movie let me down. And I have to say I will never watch it again, ever. It is up there with Napoleon and even Young Washington. I'm sorry to say, these are movies that they're not the only ones. I've seen several movies that I'm like, really? This is what you decided to do with the history that you're telling? And I can name those movies, but I will get to reviewing them eventually. So you will hear my gripes and complaints eventually. But for now, that's all I've got. Feel free to make your comments, state your opinions. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. And I hope that we can have a civil discussion and that everyone gets their point across, because everyone's opinion and points deserve to be heard, especially for a movie like this, because it's from one of the biggest directors out there. So everyone's going to have an opinion on it, whether they've seen it or not. So please leave your opinions, leave your comments, and just in the comments also let me know which movie you'd like me to review next. I've got several in mind that I want to do that I will get to eventually. But for now, thanks for joining us for History on the Spot, and we'll see you next time.